What's going on, knuckleheads? Welcome to the Fightersrep podcast, episode 75. I'm your host of Fightersrep, Fez, and we're going to get right down to boxing right here at Fightersrep, where you get the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth from the mind of a promoter / attorney on the sport of boxing. So first things first, knuckleheads, I wanted to talk about Deontay Wilder. Deontay Wilder had a very interesting fight against a journeyman by the name of Terrell Herndon, I think is how you pronounce it. Herndon. Either way, it went down Friday night in Wichita, Kansas. And Wilder was looking to, sort of rebound from his loss to Zhilei Zhang, where he got knocked out in a pretty vicious way, right? So Wilder needed this fight. He's lost something like 4 of his last 6 fights or something along those lines. So he needed a fight to kind of get his swag back, to bring his stock back up, to kind of hopefully ignite a little bit more interest in his career again, because he's really on a slide as of late. And, I think he's obviously at the tail end of his career. He's also allegedly going through some personal stuff in court and this and that. So I'm sure that's not helping him. But here's a guy who was a very exciting undefeated heavyweight, America's only heavyweight for quite a long time. And, so people will always be interested, especially considering the way he dispatched most of his opponents. So he got in there against Terrell Herndon, who, was very cautious throughout the fight. Didn't look to me like a guy who was really in there prepared and ready to beat a guy the caliber of a Deontay Wilder. I mean, maybe he did, I'm not saying he didn't prepare, but I just don't think, first off, I don't think he was on the level of a Deontay Wilder. And second, I think he was probably very worried, right, as most people are when they fight a guy like Deontay Wilder, who's probably still, I don't know about still, but at some point definitely had the biggest right hand in all of boxing. So I felt like the guy was sort of just trying to survive and, pick his shots, and just wasn't having a whole lot of success throughout this fight. Wilder's not really known for boxing. And this was just, in my opinion, just not a very great fight, not a very exciting fight either. And Deontay Wilder ended up getting the stoppage, TKO, in the 7th round. It looked to me like Herndon was tired in the 6th round, just exhausted, just looked exhausted in the last couple rounds. And, you can't be that way at the top level. You can't be that way at the elite level. And so there it is. Don Madrasso says, where's the link? Don, not sure what you're talking about, but I appreciate you being in here. If you're talking about a merchandise link, it's in the body of this video. If you want to get some Fightersrep merchandise, like the shirt. If not, please subscribe and join the channel. So Wilder, in my opinion, he's kind of in no man's land. If you ask me, he's not the kind of guy that you want to sort of build back up at this stage of his career, right? I think he's a little bit too past it at this point. And I think at this point, you have to just go ahead and go for the big money fight, right? I don't think he's going to get a lot more opportunities. It's too late in the game for him. I think at this point you go for the big money fight. They're talking about Anthony Joshua. Deontay Wilder's 39 years old. You're not going to build him back up from scratch. I don't think, like he believes, that he's still, at a place in his career where he could fight his way back up to a title. But I would, if I were him, take the Deontay Wilder fight, right? And I say that because, let's say he wants to build himself back up. A guy like Herndon is not going to really get him to that level. Don, I don't have a link right now, but, maybe we'll talk about that after this live. So he's not really at this level at this point, is Deontay Wilder, I don't think. I don't think he's going to be able to build back up. And I say that because, you look at these young, hungry heavyweights like Fabio Wardley, right? He's a guy whose name has been brought up, Moses Itama. But let's say you put, Deontay Wilder in there against a guy like Fabio Wardley, who right now is very dangerous. I think that's a bad move, because he's very dangerous. He's young. He's hungry. And the risk versus a guy like Fabio Wardley versus a guy like AJ, who is also potentially at the twilight of his career, I think is a very similar risk, but the reward is completely lopsided, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, I don't put Deontay Wilder in there against these dangerous young guys who are not going to get him paid. If I'm his management, I'm probably having a sit down with him and saying, look, time to put your ego aside. Let's talk about cashing out of this thing. If you want to take a fight, take nothing but big fights that are going to pay you a whole lot of money. And I think a fight with Anthony Joshua makes a ton of sense right now. I do think Anthony Joshua beats up Deontay Wilder. Don Madrasos is in here. He's saying Wardley has a good chin also. He does, and he can fight. That's why I don't like that fight for Wilder at all. But, if I'm Wilder's management at this point, if I'm his manager, or promoter, or coach, or anyone else on his side, right, I'm saying, dude, you're 39 years old. You've done what you had to do in this sport. I didn't see anything in particular in that last fight at the age of 39 that's telling me you're going to fight your way back up to a title fight. If that's what you want, we can make one more run. But my suggestion is, take on AJ, right? Because if you beat AJ, win or lose to AJ, you're going to make a ton of money. But if you beat him, you kind of are on another run, right? Don't fight a lower tier heavyweight, somebody that could knock you out like a Zhilei Zhang or like a Joseph Parker potentially, or like, any one of these other young upcoming hungry guys that might knock you out. Just go straight to the bag, man. Go after AJ. He'll make you a lot of money. And if you beat him, and he's beatable at this point, right? I mean, if you land a big shot on him, you could stop him. I think AJ makes a lot of sense if I'm Deontay Wilder and his management. Again, I don't like the likes of Itama. I don't like the likes, of him fighting a guy like Fabio Wardley. I actually think those are really bad matchups for him. And I think he just needs to go after AJ, man. Go after AJ. AJ, look, in my opinion, AJ got caught in that Dubois fight. I think if that fight happens 10 times, and I might be in the minority on this one, I think if AJ versus Dubois happens 10 times, AJ probably wins 8 or 9 of those. That's the way I feel about him. I don't think Dubois is a better fighter than Anthony Joshua. I think he got caught. I think Anthony Joshua got caught in that fight. He was even coming back in that fight before he got dropped for the final time in that fight. I do think AJ is a better fighter, but it's the heavyweight division. And if you land a big shot on somebody, they're going down. And AJ's chin, I wouldn't say it's the best, right? I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not the best. And so that's why I would advise 100% Deontay Wilder to go ahead and take that AJ fight. If you lose, maybe you can take another big fight against a slightly lower tier heavyweight. But if you win, man, you're right back in the saddle, right? I don't think you'll win, but it's possible, right? So that's pretty much all I got to say about Deontay Wilder. Before we move on to the next thing, subscribe, join the channel, help me continue to build the Fighters Rep. We're going to be going live every Monday at 6 p.m. Pacific. That's 9 p.m. Eastern, where we're going to be talking about everything to do with boxing on the Fighters Rep podcast, answering your questions, talking to you guys. Hawker Mustang is in here. He says a lot of Jake Paul haters are coping right now. I agree, and we're going to get into that in a minute. Now, the next topic I wanted to get into is this absolutely fantastic performance by Floyd Schofield, who decimated Tevin Farmer. I mean, knuckleheads, I really cannot believe, right? If you would have told me that Floyd Schofield was going to go out there and finish Tevin Farmer in 78 seconds, right? I would have told you you're absolutely nuts. I mean, first round knockout by Floyd Schofield. I would have told you you're absolutely nuts, but he did it. He improves to 19-0 with 13 knockouts. He's calling out the winner of Shakur versus William Cepeda. And if you ask me, after that performance, I don't see why not. I don't see why not at all. I mean, Tevin Farmer, you guys, I mean, I say this with, a lot of respect for Tevin Farmer. I mean, the guy's been in there with Cepeda twice in 2 very good fights, Murataya, and so on and so forth. I mean, he's been around a while. Heck, he fought Billy Deeb. I mean, this guy's fought Ivan Redcatch. I mean, you name it. You name him, and Tevin Farmer has fought him. And the guy's a warrior. And the guy's a really good fighter. And he's been knocked out 3 times in his entire career, right? And the last time he got knocked out, before the first round knockout against Floyd Schofield, was in 2012. He got TKO'd by Jose Pedraza, knuckleheads. In 2012, we're talking 13 years ago, is the last time that Tevin Farmer got stopped TKO. And so he gets stopped by Floyd Schofield in the first round. Listen, set that fight up. Let's get Schofield in there against Shakur Stevenson. Let's get him in there against William Cepeda. Let's get him, somebody he wants. Let's get him a big fight, because anybody who's doing that to their opponents is a bad mother flower. Let me tell you guys. And listen to this, man. Floyd Schofield, right? KO'd Tevin Farmer, TKO'd Ricardo Torres, KO'd Jesus Valentin Leon, KO'd Daniel Rosas, KO'd Juan Antonio Lopez, retired Rodrigo Guerrero, KO'd Julio Sanchez. So this guy, is packing some real power with 13 knockouts and 19 fights, right? Considering the weight division he's fighting in, right? I mean, 135 pounds, and you've got 13 knockouts out of 19 fights, and you're just 22 years of age. I mean, that's the only thing I think I would take into consideration if I'm, Floyd Schofield's promoter advisor. Like, you do want to move this guy like he's 22 years old, right? But maybe he's just advanced. I mean, nobody should be doing that to Tevin Farmer at that age, especially at that age. So big shout out to Floyd Schofield, man. I mean, he kind of, in my opinion, messed up his reputation pretty bad with whatever that was that happened in Saudi Arabia, where, he ended up not fighting Shakur, with Turkey El Sheikh and all that, and they had to get the electrician in there to fight Shakur. I mean, I thought that was an ugly situation for Schofield's reputation, but talk about redeeming it. Talk about redeeming it. I mean, that's it right there. Don Madrasos says Brian Norman Jr. versus Haney. I think that's a fantastic fight too, man. Let's talk about that in a second. But let's move on before we get to your guys' questions and comments, and you continue to drop them. But let's move on to Jake Paul and Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. Look, I recorded my prediction where I thought Jake Paul was going to win this fight either by Chavez retiring on his stool or by stoppage. That's how confident I was. That's how confident I was in Jake Paul winning this fight, despite the fact that Chavez was a former middleweight champion, right? Because first and foremost, right, I won't say foremost, but first idea of mine and coming to that prediction, right, was Chavez hadn't won that title, hadn't won a title or been a champion since 2011, 2012, right? So we're talking about 13, 14 years ago. Chavez was also a champion in the middleweight division, and Chavez was notorious, right, for kind of, here and there, not really putting forth the best effort, right? We saw him retire against Danny Jacobs unexpectedly in a fight where, he was having a little bit of success in spurts and then just decided to retire mid-fight. I mean, it was just a very weird situation, calling into question his dedication to the sport. And this is not a sport where you can mess around and be undedicated. Most sports aren't. I mean, you're going to get found out, especially in boxing. So Jake Paul, for me, who seems very dedicated, right? Look, people will joke around, and I joke around, right? I say the YouTuber from Disneyland. That's what I joke around about and call Jake Paul when I'm talking about him. But is this guy dedicated? Yes. Is he athletic? Does he have a very athletic background as a wrestler and everything else? Yes. Is he strong? Yes. Can he move? And he's pretty quick for his size? I think so. I think Jake Paul has natural talent, 100%. I think he's tough. I think he believes in himself. I think his technique continues to improve. And considering the fact that he has no amateur career, It's very impressive. Jake Paul is very impressive for a guy with no amateur career, right? And so a lot of people will say, well, he's fighting all these guys that are not really boxers, and a lot of them are MMA fighters and this and that. But look, he just beat a former middleweight champion. And a lot of them will repeat what I just said. Well, yeah, but Chavez hasn't been good for a very long time and this and that. But he's still a former champ in the middleweight division, son of Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., one of the best to ever do it. And here's the thing. Jake Paul is 12-1 now, right? So in their first 13, 10, 15, 20 fights, even sometimes, boxers aren't really fighting anyone, right? Typically, boxers are fighting tomato cans in these first 15 to 20 plus fights, right? I mean, we've seen fighters, fight tomato cans all the way to a championship, right? And then get found out near the top, right? I mean, I'll be honest with you guys. I didn't think Deontay Wilder fought good competition until maybe he reached Bermane Stiverne, who I thought was a decent fighter, and that was something like maybe like 30 fights in or something like that. So, I've seen a lot of boxers, and he's not the only one guilty of it, right? And he eventually did fight elite heavyweights and Tyson Fury and lose. I've seen many boxers like this. Most boxers actually in their first 10, 15, 20 fights aren't really fighting anyone. So for someone to point at Jake Paul's resume at this juncture, it actually hurts your argument a little bit, right? Because some of these guys, I mean, take a look at Canelo's first 10 fights, 15, 20 fights, right? I mean, some of these guys are fighting, I'm being hyperbolic, but taxi cab drivers. Really, their first 15, 20, 10, 15 fights, they're going to other countries, man. They're fighting guys off the street that just want a bit of a paycheck, or guys that have no hope, or guys with incredibly lopsided records. So for Jake Paul to fight, the likes of Mike Tyson, of course he's older, but he's still a big name, and now Chavez Jr. and Anderson Silva, who'd beaten Chavez back years ago. I mean, these are not the worst people to have on your resume relative to who's on boxers' resume this early in their career. So, and look, we have Hawker Mustang in here saying over 90% of Wilder's victories were against tomato cans. I mean, I would agree with that. That's my opinion as well. I didn't think he really fought many people. So, I'm not saying that Jake Paul is the greatest boxer in the world or the greatest technician. I made a post-fight video, right, saying that I thought, he'll never be a technician the caliber of Floyd Mayweather, right? And I brought up Floyd Mayweather because I think as far as marketing, he's doing something very similar. But I think Jake Paul will be a decent, I think he could be a decent cruiserweight. And can he win a title? I think that'll be tough. I think that'll be very tough. But is it possible? Absolutely. I mean, let's not forget, there are 4 belts on the line, right? And I think the WBA was already saying that they were going to rank him somewhere in the top 15. I mean, don't get me wrong, but I could be wrong there. But I thought I saw an article somewhere online saying that the WBA would consider him like a top 15 guy with this win, and then, if we're being honest, historically, cruiserweight has just never been a glamour division, right? I mean, the guys always go up to heavyweight because they're not getting any attention at cruiserweight, right? You think about Evander Holyfield, you think about Alexander Usyk. I mean, we do have Jai Opetaia trying to make cruiserweight great. I won't say make cruiserweight great again because it was never really great, but he's trying to make cruiserweight great initially. And I think he's a very exciting prospect. But historically, cruiserweights have always been, in my opinion, almost like guys who are getting experience so that eventually they can move up to the heavyweight division. We we saw it as well with Murat Garcia, who was a good cruiserweight as well, who Usyk beat in that tournament they did. I think it was the Super 6 for the Muhammad Ali trophy. But look, Jake Paul can make some noise in the cruiserweight division. I mean, I think he can absolutely win a title, maybe a lower tier title at the very least, maybe one of those international, intercontinental, or whatever the heck they come up with, silver, gold, bronze, But can he win a legitimate 4-belt title? Maybe that too. I mean, I wouldn't put it past him because you got to understand, like any sport, right? This is a sport of dedication. I mean, if the guy is putting in the work, right, and it looks like he is, because I thought his performance against Chavez was clean. If he's putting in the work and he keeps putting in the work, he's only going to get better. And he does have the physical attributes to do it. He's got big power, you could tell. Where I think that he needs to improve the most, right, is, how he reacts when guys are throwing punches at him. Because I feel like in those last 2 rounds when Chavez was coming at him and really winging those shots at him, he was connecting at times, and Jake Paul looked a little bit flustered. That's when you saw kind of the green part of Jake Paul's boxing career come out, right? You saw the green there. You saw the Dubai chocolate in the middle. It was a little bit, whoa, what's going on here? But he ties up and he figures it out. I think with time, he's going to get better at that. In sparring, he's going to get better at that. Taking more fights, he's going to get better at that. And at some point, he's going to break enough ceilings to where I do think he might be able to win a cruiserweight title. I really do. And I think cruiserweight's his division. I think if he loses too much weight, he's not going to be as effective. He looks very strong and athletic at this weight. I think if he gains weight, he's not going to be any match for these heavyweights. He's too small for heavyweight. I think cruiserweight is the right division for him. But yeah, I mean, I got to be honest. I thought it was a good performance from Jake Paul. I thought it was a good performance. I think he's a pretty good fighter. I don't think he's a bad fighter. I do think, a serious Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. might have had a different result. A guy who was more in shape, a guy who was a better, more ready for this and maybe closer to his prime, because he did win those last 2 rounds, but it's too little too late. Too little too late, baby. So, that's what I got to say about Jake Paul. I see a lot of you guys are dropping comments, so let's talk about it. Let's discuss. That's what we do here at Fighters Rep, the greatest boxing fraternity of all time. Subscribe, join, and anything you donate or purchase, super chat or t-shirts that you buy or anything like that, I'm going to reinvest it right back into this channel. And so I can continue to drop daily content for you guys, hopefully get out this rat race so I could do this for a living. So let's see here. Hawker Mustang says, Jake Paul just beat a washed-up former champion. That's the same thing that Tank Davis was waiting to do versus Lomachenko. Yeah, but listen to what you're saying, Hawker. I mean, Tank Davis is a pro fighter. Jake Paul is a guy who was a YouTuber. You know what I mean? With 12 fights before Saturday night. I mean, the fact that he's doing this at all with the amount of fights he has, it's pretty impressive if you ask me. I mean, I'm impressed by Jake Paul. People can talk all the trash they want. Listen, I've been watching boxing my whole life. I ran what I believe the best kickboxing promotion in the country. I've seen fighters come and go. I've seen, everything that they deal with, they go through, how they act, how they behave. I'm convinced this guy can probably win a title at some point. I'm not saying he's going to be the best cruiserweight. I don't think he'll beat a Jail Pataya at any point. I think it might be too late for him. But I do think he'll make a little bit of noise and maybe win a title at some point. I think it's possible. I do believe that Chavez Jr., says Don Madrazos, I do believe that Chavez Jr. will continue to disappoint as much as I believe Jake Paul will continue to exploit washed old fighters. And I hear what you're saying, and I feel like this goes in and plays into the video that I made yesterday, right, about comparing Jake Paul to Floyd Mayweather. The comparison wasn't a technique comparison or a defensive wizardry comparison. The comparison was a marketing wizardry comparison, right? Jake Paul's a decent fighter, but what he's great at is pissing people off and getting people to tune in because they want to watch him lose. They want to watch him lose, which is the same reason Floyd Mayweather got so much attention, got so much ticket sales, got so much pay-per-view buys. People want to watch these guys lose, and nobody rubs people the wrong way better than a YouTuber that was on Disney TV or whatever, the YouTuber from Disneyland, I call him, Jake Paul. Nobody rubs people the wrong way more than a guy like that, beating up UFC legends, trashing them, trashing, the sport of boxing and calling it out on its bullshit, trashing, boxers, and then going out there and beating these guys, and I gotta say, and I do think, where I do think that it's planned, right? Where I do think it's planned is, he could have really hit sixth gear on the heel act if he would have knocked Mike Tyson out. Let me tell you guys, he could have knocked Mike Tyson out in vicious fashion. And I almost feel like it would have blown his heel act and his brand even bigger. But even he showed restraint there, and that shows me that there's some strategy. There is a method to his madness. Sure, he's going to disrespect these legends and stuff to get under people's skin and get them to tune in, but he's not gonna go that far, right? He's not gonna, you know what I mean? He wasn't gonna desecrate Mike Tyson, but he did, beat him up, and now he beat up Chavez Jr.'s son, and he's going to continue to piss people off by beating up big names, right, that probably don't have the best chance or any chance at all at beating him. But he's going to keep doing it. And listen, he's not going to be doing anything different, really, than a lot of boxers are doing. And I will say, people do have a chance to beat him. Tyron Woodley, I thought, had a chance. Anderson Silva had a chance. Chavez Jr. had a chance, even though he looked terrible the first, 8 rounds of the fight until the final 2 rounds. It was hardly throwing any punches, but that's on him. That's not on Jake Paul. And I'm a fight promoter. Let me tell you guys something. People that are saying that these fights are rigged and staged, that's absolutely ridiculous to say something like that. I mean, you know how many people you would have to get on board to rig a fight like that? I mean, it's the athletic commission that's sending out these officials. Are you telling me guys are in cahoots with the athletic commissions? I mean, of course it's happened, but that's not what's happening here. Jake Paul's just better than these guys. And why is it so hard to believe? Chavez Jr. was almost 40 years old, right? And he's never been the greatest fighter. But still, I will say it's still an impressive accomplishment for Jake Paul to beat a guy like that. Still an impressive accomplishment. So Dom Madrazo said it was a scam, George. I don't think it was a scam. I think it's marketing. I think it's great marketing. And I think he's just better than Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. That's why I predicted him to win. There's nothing scammy going on here. He's telling you, I'm going to fight this guy, right? We know how old he is, but we also know he was a former champion. I think I'm good enough at this point to beat him. Let's run it. And then he runs it. We all pay to watch it. And he wins. I'm not mad at the guy. The only thing I ever get annoyed about with Jake Paul is, when he does too much, as they say, right? When he is maybe trashing legends, like talking bad about them and stuff like that. I think he's done that a couple times where, he got a little bit too excited, a little bit too anxious and said some things maybe I didn't agree with regards to like legends like Mike Tyson and this and that, or, the face off and stuff like that. I mean, but Mike Tyson kind of, went after him in the face off too. So, I mean, I'm not what I'm saying is I don't think Jake Paul is scamming anybody. I think he's just, being his authentic self, right? And he's playing a heel, right? Which he understands as a master marketer that is going to, sell a lot of tickets, sell a lot of pay-per-views, and by being his authentic self, what I mean by that is, not the personality he's taken on, because he's taken on the personality of a heel. I don't know if that's who he is, but by being his authentic self, I mean a marketer, and I mean a great athlete. This guy's a great athlete. I don't care what anybody says. He's a good athlete. He's a fighter. Anybody who could transition from what he was doing to pro boxing at that quick is a pretty good athlete. You know what I mean? His brother's a good athlete too. They got good genes. What do you want to do about it? Junior didn't do anything. Jake Sr. and Junior were all in on it, a money grab. Yeah. I mean, look, they're going to be in on it because they want to make money. But did Julio Cesar Chavez Jr. go in there to lose? No, I don't believe that's what happened here at all. That's my point. I'm more impressed with Jake Paul. I'm more disappointed with Tank Davis, says Hawker Mustang. I agree. I think the only fixed fight he had was carrying Mike Tyson. But Hawker, that's not a fixed fight. Right? A fixed fight is when you premeditate and you say, okay, we're going to, set this fight up so that fighter A wins, fighter B loses, right? That's not what happened there. Jake Paul went out there. He fought Mike Tyson. He was the better man, right? And he decided not to knock him out. That wasn't a fixed fight. That was Jake Paul showing Mike Tyson mercy. You guys understand? Because Jake Paul could have knocked Mike Tyson the heck out, but he chose not to. He chose to, respect the legend. And so that goes to what I was saying earlier. I think if Jake Paul would have knocked out Mike Tyson, his star related to his heel persona would have been even bigger than it is now. But he's got respect. You can tell he's got respect for the sport. He got respect for this legend enough, right? Enough to where, okay, maybe he'll badmouth him and say some stuff to build some hype, but he's not going to knock him out. He didn't want to desecrate. He didn't want to desecrate Tyson. He didn't want to desecrate the sport, and that's what he felt like he would have been doing. But I would argue that if he would have knocked Mike Tyson out, he would have been one of the most hated human beings, even more so on the planet that he is right now. I mean, everybody knows who Mike Tyson is. If you hurt Mike Tyson, man, you're never, there's a chance that it might have backfired on him. People might have started hating him so much they would have just boycotted his fights. I mean, I doubt it. I think it would have just brought more attention to him. But I think he did it out of respect. Not knocking out Mike Tyson was out of respect. Hawker Mustang says, Platinum Mike Perry was the bare-knuckle champion, and he was a good striker in the UFC. That's true, and that was easy work for Jake Paul. Now, granted, Mike Perry was a smaller guy coming up. I didn't think he had I thought he had a chance, but I thought it was a very slim chance in that fight, right? And pretty much, I've had Jake Paul the favorite in every fight he's fought because I think he knows what he's looking at. He's a good fighter. He's got a good team around him. They've got a good eye. They know who's a threat and who's not. But he's, am I going to get mad at the guy for picking fights at the beginning of his career that he thinks he could win or he's going to win? That's what every boxer does. And he's said it himself. He's called out the sport of boxing and trashed them for it as they deserve. So, I'm not saying Jake Paul is the savior of boxing either. I do think, some of his shenanigans are a little bit cringe and annoying. I do think he talks trash sometimes and disses people, but he's not doing anything that boxers haven't been doing for forever. Right. And if you're talking about name power, I mean, look, if you're talking about credibility as a fighter, the first 13 guys on his resume are way more credible than the first 13 guys on most of the resumes of most of the champions that we all love. I mean, we're being honest. Let's go take a look at Canelo's first 13 opponents. It would be terrible to look at. So, that's kind of where I'm at with him, man. I mean, look, where he's getting people's attention is he's riling people up because he's beating up legends. He's beating up big names. He's humiliating MMA fighters and former boxers. That's what he's doing. He's doing it on purpose. And at first I thought it was a little bit annoying, but now I'm here for it. Now I'm starting to enjoy it a little bit. I'm not going to lie to you guys. If Chavez Jr. was 29, he probably would have won, but he's 39. Hawker, listen to what you're saying, though. And I caught myself saying the same thing. He probably would have won. Probably. I mean, that's a former middleweight champion you're talking about, and is that an indictment on boxing? Is that an indictment on the 4-belt era where everybody gets a belt? Is that an indictment on Chavez? I don't know. Maybe a mixture of all of those things, but it's something to think about, right? Because I agree. Chavez would have probably won, but Jake Paul would have probably won too. If Jake Paul would have beaten Chavez at 29 years of age, I wouldn't have been surprised. Look, the other thing you got to consider is Jake Paul fought at cruiserweight on Saturday night. Chavez wasn't a cruiserweight. He would have had to move up to cruiserweight. That would have been a tough fight for him. I think maybe he would have had more gas, and I would have leaned towards Chavez, right? if he would have fought Paul in his prime, because I think he would have put a lot of pressure on Paul and done what he did in those last 2 rounds through the entirety of the fight, or at least tried to. But I'm not sure what the result would have been. Don Madrazo says, I'm not saying it was fixed, but Junior just showed up for a check and his dad knew it. And so did Jake. I mean, listen, they're all showing up for a check though, right, Don? I mean, let's be honest here. We're all showing up for a check. These are prize fighters. They're showing up for a check. They're not showing up to fight Jake Paul for legacy. They're showing up for a check. But he's showing up to win. I don't think Chavez showed up with the intention to lay down and get his ass kicked. And he got his ass kicked on Saturday. He really did. I mean, he threw, in my opinion, an embarrassing amount of punches the first 8 rounds. And that's on him. That's not Jake Paul's fault. So, yeah, everybody's there for a check. But Jake Paul, in my opinion, keeps proving the haters and the doubters wrong. Look, at some point, you have to throw your framework away. And you have to say, look, objectively speaking, this guy's an athlete. This guy's a good fighter. He's a good fighter. He's an athlete. He's dedicated. He's got the team. He's got the resources. He puts his mind to it. He gets his done. It's his focus. What more do you want from the guy? You know, what more do you want? I mean, I don't love the fact, look, I'll be honest with you, me personally, I don't love the fact that he's covered in tattoos and talks, a little bit over the top and says terrible things. Sometimes it goes crazy and gets a little bit too excited, but that's what a lot of fighters do. I'm not personally a fan of that, but that's what fighters do. Do I think Jake Paul's a good fighter? I do think Jake Paul's a good fighter. Do I think Jake Paul is a master of marketing and pissing people off and getting them to tune in? I do. He made $1.57 million in ticket revenue on Saturday, which is the record at the Honda Center in Anaheim, California. So, I don't have to like every little thing he does, but I think he's a good fighter. Hawker Mustang says, Jake Paul should have knocked out Mike Tyson. He's already the bad guy anyway. That's what I'm saying. Hawker, that's what I'm saying. I mean, if you're going to do it, go all out and do it. You know what I mean? If you're going to do it right, brother. But, it shows you. It shows you that there is a limit. There is a limit to Jake Paul's persona, right? There is a limit to his heel antics, right? He's not going to knock out Mike Tyson, right? Which I was waiting for. I was like, oh, he's whipping Tyson's ass. Time to get this over with. Let's really go to that next level. I would have told him to knock Tyson out. I'm being honest with you guys. I would have just told him, knock him out. You're about to become a billionaire when you knock out Mike Tyson. But anyway, although somebody might have shot him if he knocked out Mike Tyson the same way he did Tyron Woodley, and he could have. He could have done just that to Mike Tyson. I believe Chavez Jr. didn't have the conditioning to fight hard for 10 rounds. He was trying to save his energy for the later rounds. And most of all, he was trying to just survive, not get knocked out. I think he felt Jake Paul's power. I think he probably said, yeah, I can't just wade into, this guy's punches or punch range. I might get knocked out. Let me keep my hands up. And like you said, I agree with you, Hawker. I think he preserved his energy to the last couple rounds, championship rounds, and then, went all out. At that point, Jake Paul was, tired from beating him up the first 8 rounds and, not as active as he was the first 8 rounds. And Chavez had all the energy and went for it, went for broke, but just couldn't do anything. So, listen, Jake Paul's an enigma. He's exciting. He's intriguing. People dislike him. They want to watch him lose. But whether you want to watch him lose or win, you're going to tune in. He's got you tuning in. And so that's what I think of this whole thing. Anyway, knuckleheads, that's all I've got on this episode of the Fighters Rep podcast, episode 75. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. Be sure to tune in every Monday at 6 o'clock Pacific. I'm going to be going live after all the big boxing fights from now on as well. I might even do a fight buddy thing once in a while where we can watch together. And I'm going to continue dropping daily content for you guys, so any super chats are greatly appreciated. It really motivates me. If you guys don't know, I had 2, very difficult jobs for a very long time promoting fights and doing my day job. I still do my day job. I had to pull back from promoting fights because it was just way too much. I wore myself thin over the course of 7 years and burnt myself to a crisp, and realized that what I can do besides my day job is this, commentating on the fights. That's what I'm capable of doing. Also have, I have kids playing sports. I have a family. I'm raising them. So it's not easy. Any motivation helps, and super chats help. And you guys, purchasing merchandise from Fighters Rep in the link below greatly helps. And your subscriptions greatly help. And telling your friends about it greatly helps too. And listen, I'm here for you guys. Anytime you guys want to reach out to me on Instagram, I'm there for you guys, man. This is a brotherhood. This is not like those other channels. Here for you always. Anything you need, you want to speak to me personally, right there on Instagram. I look forward to hearing what you guys have to say. Have a great one.